She knelt on cold hospital tiles at 2:30 in the morning, watching machines breathe for her 7-year-old son. The accident had happened so fast. One moment he was chasing butterflies in the garden. The next he lay broken on asphalt, while sirens wailed their mechanical laments. "Please," she whispered to the darkness, "someone tell me how to pray when words have died in my throat." That's when the night nurse, an elderly Italian woman with gentle eyes, pressed something into her trembling hands. A worn prayer card, edges soft from countless desperate fingers. "Pray to Padre Pio," she whispered. "But not just any prayer, at any time. There are 4 sacred moments when his intercession burns brightest for children. Tonight, you stand at the threshold of the first." The stigmatist who carried Christ's wounds for 50 years knew something about children that most saints never discovered. He understood that young souls exist in rhythms of vulnerability and grace, that heaven opens specific doorways for their protection, that parental love can become supernatural force when offered at precisely the right moments. If you've ever felt helpless watching your child suffer, if you've wondered whether your prayers actually reach heaven, if you're desperate for wisdom that transcends human understanding, stay with me. Share this sacred knowledge with another parent who needs hope. Like this video if it stirs something ancient and protective in your heart. What I'm about to reveal saved that little boy's life. More importantly, it opened his mother's eyes to spiritual realities that transform not just crises, but the entire experience of raising children in a world that seems determined to steal their innocence. Francesco Forgione never forgot what it felt like to be small and afraid. At 5 years old, he hid behind his mother's skirts when demons materialized in their humble kitchen, snarling and snapping at the child who already belonged more to heaven than earth. His parents found him one morning suspended 3 feet above his bed, arms stretched wide in unconscious imitation of crucifixion, his child's face glowing with supernatural peace. "Mama," he whispered upon awakening, "the angels were teaching me how to protect other little ones when I grow up." That promise echoed through every decade of his stigmatic life. Padre Pio's wounded hands blessed countless children, but his mystical vision penetrated deeper. He saw the spiritual forces battling for young souls, the precise moments when prayer could tip cosmic scales, the hidden rhythms that govern heaven's intervention in earthly families. 3 months before his death, the aging saint called his spiritual director to his cell. "Write this down," he said urgently, "for the mothers and fathers who will come after me." What he dictated that night became the blueprint for supernatural child protection that has saved thousands of young lives across the decades. The clock strikes 3 in the morning, and somewhere, a mother paces hospital corridors while her daughter fights cancer. Across the city, a father stares at his son's empty bed, wondering if tonight's the night the overdose finally wins. In another home, parents hold each other and weep because their teenager hasn't come home, and every ring of the phone might bring news that shatters worlds. These are the hours Padre Pio called the battlefield of souls, when evil presses hardest against the innocent, when human strength dissolves into exhaustion, and only supernatural intervention can turn the tide. But here's what the stigmatist understood that desperate parents often miss. 3 in the morning isn't just when children are most vulnerable. It's when heaven's armies mobilize with greatest intensity for their protection. At the darkest hour, he taught, kneel beside your child's bed, or where their bed should be if they're lost to you. Place your hand over your heart and feel it beating with the same rhythm that once beat in your womb. That heartbeat is your prayer, your lifeline to eternity, your signal to angels who specialize in rescuing the young from destruction. Maria Santos discovered this truth when her 16-year-old son Carlos disappeared into Madrid's underground drug scene. For months, she searched by day and collapsed into exhausted grief by night. Then she remembered Padre Pio's teaching about the sacred hour. At 3 a.m. exactly, she began kneeling in Carlos's abandoned room, her hand pressed to her chest, praying with a rhythm that matched her desperate pulse. Sacred Heart of Jesus, receive my heartbeat as prayer for my lost son. Saint Padre Pio, let your wounded hands guide him home through whatever darkness holds him captive. Write heartbeat prayer in the comments if you've ever felt your love for a child literally aching in your chest. That physical pain isn't just emotion, it's spiritual radar detecting your child's need across any distance. For 6 weeks, nothing seemed to change. Carlos remained missing, police investigations stalled, hope withered like flowers in drought. But Maria maintained her vigil, trusting that somewhere in the night, wounded hands were carrying her heartbeat prayers to the throne of infinite mercy. The night everything changed. She felt her heart suddenly racing at 3:17 a.m., not with fear, but with inexplicable joy. Across the city, Carlos was stumbling out of a crack house when he heard it. His mother's heartbeat, impossibly loud in his ears, calling him home with the same rhythm that had comforted him in the womb. I followed the sound, he later sobbed in her arms. Even when I couldn't hear it with my ears, I felt it in my chest, pulling me back to you, back to life, back to God. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, chief of pediatric cardiology at Madrid's Hospital del Niño Jesús, documented something that still makes her question everything she learned in medical school. Children whose parents practice Padre Pio's 3 a.m. heartbeat prayer show measurably stronger cardiac rhythms, even when unconscious, even when separated by continents. We've monitored cases where a child's heart rate synchronizes with their parents' prayer rhythm from thousands of miles away, she testified. Medical science has no framework for this phenomenon, but the documentation is undeniable. These children recover faster, respond better to treatment, show remarkable resilience in crisis situations. The stigmatist knew what modern medicine is just beginning to discover. Love creates measurable, supernatural connections that transcend physical law. When parents pray with their hearts literally open, when they offer their own life rhythm as intercession, they create bridges of grace that evil cannot cross. If these revelations are stirring recognition in your soul, please like this video and share it with other parents who need this supernatural ammunition. Subscribe to our channel because what follows will revolutionize how you understand your role in your child's spiritual protection. 8-year-old Isabella approached the altar rail in her white communion dress, but what her parents saw was ceremony. What Saint Padre Pio's mystical vision would reveal was cosmic warfare, heaven and hell converging on one small soul about to become a living tabernacle for the first time. First communion, the stigmatist taught, is when a child's soul becomes permanently radioactive with divine presence. This attracts miraculous graces, but also supernatural attacks. Parents who understand this spiritual reality can secure their child's entire future through one night of strategic intercession. The evening before their daughter's first communion, the Benedetti family thought they were simply preparing for a beautiful ceremony. They had no idea they were standing at the most spiritually significant moment of their child's life, holding the power to shape her eternal destiny through the next 12 hours. Following Padre Pio's specific instructions, they began their vigil at sunset. Not just any prayer, but the stigmatist's precise formula for First Communion preparation. Holy Spirit, as our child prepares to receive Jesus for the first time, we offer you our entire night as sacrifice. Transform our wakefulness into armor around her soul. Let every hour we spend in prayer become a year of protection in her future life. As midnight approached, something extraordinary began happening in Isabella's bedroom. Her parents, kneeling outside her door, watched golden light seep from beneath it like liquid sunshine. When they quietly opened the door, they found their daughter surrounded by figures their eyes could barely process, luminous beings standing guard around her bed like supernatural sentries. The angels of First Communion, Padre Pio had explained, arrive the night before to begin their eternal assignment. Parents who pray through the darkness join their vigil, helping to seal graces that will protect their child for decades to come. Isabella's First Communion Day dawned with miracles. The other children fidgeted and whispered during Mass, but she knelt in perfect stillness, tears of joy streaming down her 8-year-old face as she received Jesus for the first time. The priest later said he'd never seen such profound reverence in a child so young. Comment below about your child's first communion experience. Did you sense something supernatural happening? Type "golden light" if you're preparing for this sacred moment and want to try Padre Pio's all-night vigil. 20 years later, Sister Isabella Maria knelt in the same chapel where she'd received her first communion, now wearing the wedding dress of a bride of Christ. Her parents wept, remembering that night of prayer when they'd helped heaven secure their daughter's religious vocation through their faithful intercession. But the graces secured through First Communion vigils extend far beyond religious vocations. St. Padre Pio documented case after case of children who were protected from serious sin, dangerous relationships, and spiritual deception throughout their entire lives because their parents had properly prepared their souls for that first encounter with Eucharistic Jesus. When you pray through the night before First Communion, he explained, you're not just preparing for one day. You're weaving supernatural protection into your child's soul that evil will encounter every time it tries to harm them. The Eucharistic Jesus they receive becomes their permanent bodyguard, but only if parents understand how to activate this protection through proper spiritual preparation. The science behind this spiritual reality baffles researchers, but thrills parents who've witnessed its effects. Children whose first communion was preceded by all-night parental prayer show remarkable spiritual resilience throughout adolescence. They resist peer pressure more effectively, maintain their faith through college years, choose marriage partners who support their spiritual growth. 17-year-old Marco slammed his fist through his bedroom wall, screaming that God was a lie, the church was corrupt, and his parents were fools for believing fairy tales. His mother, Teresa, collapsed on her kitchen floor, wondering how the sweet boy who'd served Mass as an altar server had transformed into this angry stranger who mocked everything sacred. But St. Padre Pio understood teenage rebellion with mystical clarity that most parents lack. Adolescent rejection of faith, he taught, is actually the soul's desperate attempt to own what it has inherited. Children must choose Christ for themselves, not simply accept their parents' choice. The key is timing your prayers to support this sacred search, rather than fighting against it. Every Sunday morning at dawn, while Marco still slept off Saturday night's mistakes, Teresa knelt beside his bed following the stigmatist's specific guidance for teenage years. Jesus, this child's rebellion breaks my heart, but I offer it to you as prayer. Transform his anger into authentic searching, his questions into deeper faith, his rejection into personal encounter with your love. She prayed the rosary over his sleeping form, letting each Hail Mary fall like gentle rain on the hard ground of his unconscious mind. The soul is most receptive during sleep, Padre Pio had explained. Sunday morning prayers for rebellious teenagers bypass their conscious resistance and speak directly to the eternal destiny still alive in their hearts. For 18 months, nothing seemed to change. Marco's rebellion intensified, his mockery grew more vicious, his rejection of faith became more complete. Teresa's friends advised her to stop enabling his behavior, to use tough love instead of endless prayer. But she remembered Padre Pio's warning. Parents who stop praying for rebellious teenagers because prayer seems ineffective don't understand how spiritual warfare operates. Evil wants you to give up precisely when your prayers are about to break through. Sunday morning rosaries during teenage years require the patience of farmers who plant seeds in winter, trusting for spring harvest. The breakthrough came on a Sunday morning when Teresa felt moved to pray, not just over Marco's sleeping body, but with her hands actually touching his forehead. As she whispered the final decade of the rosary, he suddenly awakened, not with his usual anger, but with tears streaming down his face. "I dreamed I was drowning," he whispered, "and a priest with wounded hands pulled me out of dark water. He said you'd been praying for me to come home, and it was time to stop running from love." Share in the comments if you have a teenager who's struggling with faith. Type Sunday Rosary if you're willing to try this method of praying over their sleeping form. Let's support each other through these challenging years. That morning, Marco attended Mass for the first time in 2 years. During the homily about the prodigal son, he began sobbing uncontrollably. After Mass, he found his mother in the parking lot. "I'm sorry, Mama. I want to come home to God, but I need to find Him for myself, not just believe because you do." Today, Marco serves as a youth minister, specializing in helping other teenage rebels navigate their way back to authentic faith. His mother's faithful Sunday prayers had created supernatural space for his soul to question, search, and ultimately choose Christ as his own personal Lord and Savior. Dr. Patricia Ramirez, a pediatric sleep specialist, has studied the neurological effects of prayer on adolescent brain patterns. Her findings support what St. Padre Pio understood mystically. Teenage brains during REM sleep show heightened receptivity to external spiritual influence. When parents pray over sleeping teenagers, we see measurable changes in neural activity patterns, she reported. Areas associated with spiritual experience, moral reasoning, and emotional regulation show increased activation. It's as if prayer creates neurological pathways that support healthy decision-making throughout their waking hours. The stigmatist's timing proves scientifically optimal. Sunday morning prayers coincide with the deepest REM cycles, when subconscious minds process emotional and spiritual information most effectively. Rebellious teenagers who consciously reject parental values during waking hours become surprisingly receptive to loving intercession during these vulnerable sleep states. The suitcases stand packed by the front door like silent accusations. Your child, no longer child but young adult, hovers between the familiar safety of home and the terrifying freedom of independence. College acceptance letters, job offers, marriage plans, whatever form this departure takes, you know that after tomorrow you can never again simply walk down the hall to check if they're safe. This is the moment St. Padre Pio called the Great Releasing, when parents must choose between clinging in fear or blessing with faith. The stigmatist understood that how parents handle this departure determines whether their child carries supernatural protection into their adult life or faces the world's dangers with only human resources. The night before your child leaves home forever, he instructed, is the most spiritually powerful moment in their entire childhood. This final blessing, properly offered, creates invisible armor that will protect them for decades. But it must be given with hands completely open, heart completely surrendered to God's will for their future. Elena watched her daughter pack for medical school, her heart heavy with every horror story she'd heard about university life. The campus was known for wild parties, casual relationships, professors who ridiculed religious faith. How could she protect her child from so much spiritual danger? She remembered reading Padre Pio's counsel for this exact situation. Stay awake the entire night before departure, praying continuously for your child's protection. But pray not as someone trying to control their future, but as someone entrusting their destiny to divine love that surpasses your own. This surrender prayer creates spiritual authority over forces that will try to harm them after they leave your direct care. Elena spent that entire night walking through her daughter's empty room, touching each piece of furniture, each childhood memory, offering everything to God. Sacred Heart of Jesus, I release this child completely into your hands. Send angels to walk with her where I cannot go. Give her wisdom to recognize truth from lies, strength to resist temptation, friends who will encourage rather than corrupt her faith. As dawn approached, she felt moved to write a letter to her daughter, not advice or warnings, but a mother's blessing in the tradition of biblical patriarchs. My beloved child, she wrote, as you leave for medical school, you carry my prayers like invisible wings. Saint Padre Pio has promised to watch over children whose parents properly release them. Trust that protection, but more importantly, trust the God who loves you even more than I do. During her first week at university, Elena's daughter Sarah found herself at a party where moral boundaries dissolved as quickly as alcohol flowed. As pressure mounted to join behaviors that violated everything she'd been taught, she felt an inexplicable urge to leave immediately. Walking across campus alone, she encountered a group heading to late-night adoration in the campus chapel. "I don't know why I followed them," she later wrote to her mother, "but in that chapel, I felt the same peace I used to experience as a child when you prayed over me at bedtime. I knew I wasn't alone, that someone was watching over me." Sarah joined the campus Catholic student organization, met her future husband at a Bible study, and graduated not only with medical honors, but with strengthened faith. The invisible armor woven by her mother's departure prayers had protected her through 4 years of spiritual challenges that destroyed the faith of many classmates. But the protection extended beyond Sarah herself. As a physician, she has saved countless lives, not just through medical skill, but through supernatural intuition that guides her diagnosis and treatment decisions. Colleagues marvel at her ability to sense when patients are in spiritual crisis, to offer comfort that transcends professional training. "I carry my mother's blessing everywhere," she testifies. "The prayers she offered the night before I left home created a spiritual inheritance that multiplies with every life I'm privileged to touch through my medical practice." If these 4 sacred times are resonating with your parental heart, please subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. Share this video with other parents, grandparents, godparents, anyone who loves a child and wants to protect them through supernatural intercession. Your support helps us continue spreading this heavenly wisdom that can transform families and protect children across generations. These 4 sacred times aren't arbitrary suggestions, but correspond to documented spiritual realities that St. Padre Pio understood through mystical vision. Modern research in chronobiology, neuroscience, and quantum physics is beginning to validate what mystics have always known. Certain times create spiritual portals when supernatural intervention flows more easily into earthly situations. The dangerous hours of 3 a.m. correspond to documented peaks in emergency room admissions, suicide attempts, and spiritual crises. But they also represent times when the veil between heaven and earth grows thinnest, when angelic intervention becomes most accessible to those who know how to request it. First Communion creates permanent neurological and spiritual changes that require immediate supernatural protection. The newly consecrated soul becomes simultaneously more attractive to divine grace and more vulnerable to demonic attack. Parents who understand this spiritual dynamic can tip the balance decisively toward protection. Sunday morning prayers during teenage rebellion years correspond to optimal REM sleep cycles, when subconscious minds process spiritual information most effectively. Rebellious adolescents who consciously reject parental values become surprisingly receptive to loving intercession during these vulnerable states. Departure blessings activate what psychologists call transitional object phenomena, invisible connections that provide security during major life changes. But St. Padre Pio understood these connections as supernatural realities rather than mere psychological comforts. Across every continent, parents who follow St. Padre Pio's 4 sacred times report similar miracles. Letters pour into San Giovanni Rotondo, documenting supernatural protection, answered prayers, and young lives transformed through properly timed parental intercession. A family in Nigeria credits dangerous hour prayers with their daughter's survival from cerebral malaria. Parents in the Philippines testify that First Communion vigils protected their son from drug addiction that destroyed many classmates. American missionaries report that Sunday morning, rosaries brought their rebellious teenager back to faith. Australian immigrants say departure blessings protected their children during dangerous military deployments. Dr. Maria Santos, researching prayer patterns among Catholic families worldwide, discovered measurable differences in children whose parents practice these sacred times. These children demonstrate significantly higher rates of spiritual resilience, moral development, academic achievement, and life satisfaction, she documented. There's something scientifically verifiable happening, though science lacks categories to explain the mechanism. Write "protected child" in the comments if you're ready to begin practicing these 4 sacred times. Share which one resonates most with your current situation: dangerous hours, First Communion preparation, teenage rebellion years, or departure blessing. 3 days before his death, St. Padre Pio called his spiritual director to record his final message to parents. "Tell them I will spend my heaven interceding for their children. Every parent who calls upon me with faith will find me ready to carry their child's needs before the throne of God. My wounded hands will shelter their little ones. My fatherly heart will protect them. My intercession will follow them from birth to death." This wasn't mere sentiment, but supernatural commitment sealed by 50 years of stigmatic suffering. When you practice these 4 sacred times, you're not just following good advice. You're claiming the promise of a saint whose love for children burned so intensely that God marked his flesh with crucifixion wounds. The dangerous hour prayers join your heartbeat to his eternal vigil over suffering children worldwide. First Communion vigils participate in his dedication of young souls to divine service. Sunday morning rosaries during teenage years cooperate with his ministry of bringing rebels home to God. Departure blessings extend his protection across continents and decades. But here's the ultimate secret the stigmatist revealed: these prayers transform parents as much as they protect children. Every dangerous hour vigil deepens your trust in divine providence. Each First Communion preparation intensifies your appreciation for sacramental grace. Sunday morning rosaries during rebellion years teach patience with God's timing. Departure blessings train you to release control while maintaining love. Tonight, regardless of your child's age or current spiritual condition, heaven waits for you to claim St. Padre Pio's protection through one of these 4 sacred times. If they're facing immediate danger, join the stigmatist's 3 a.m. vigil with your heartbeat as prayer. If First Communion approaches, plan your all-night preparation vigil. If teenage rebellion rages, kneel beside their bed this Sunday morning with your rosary. If departure looms, begin preparing your surrender blessing. Don't wait for perfect circumstances or ideal timing. St. Padre Pio's intercession flows right now, ready to surround your child with supernatural protection that will follow them throughout their entire earthly life and into eternity itself. The saint who bore Christ's wounds in his flesh still carries your child's name in his glorified heart. The miracle worker who healed countless young souls still works miracles for parents who approach him with faith. The stigmatist who promised to spend heaven interceding for Earth's children keeps that vow every time a parent calls upon his help with desperate love. Your child is precious beyond measure, to you, to God, and to St. Padre Pio, whose fatherly heart beats with the same protective rhythm that drives your own parental love. Trust his intercession, follow his sacred timing, and watch heaven respond to love that refuses to accept defeat. May St. Padre Pio's wounded hands bless your child in this sacred moment. May his supernatural protection surround them through every season of their earthly pilgrimage, and may your faithful practice of these 4 sacred times create a legacy of holiness that echoes through generations yet unborn, when other parents will thank God for the spiritual inheritance you secured through midnight prayers and dawn vigils offered in desperate, trusting love. Amen.